Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. The show is brought to you by supporters on Patreon. Times are tough for everyone right now, and so it's much appreciated when people do what they can to help me to keep the show running, despite any of their own difficulties and challenges. So if you would like to, and you have the means, please take a look at patreon.com/sleepytimetales at the link in the show notes or from the website to see what you can get as a supporter. There are real rewards available to people who sign up from as little as $2 a month, even over and above the feeling that you are helping thousands of fellow insomniacs to get a good night's sleep. Other methods of support are listed in the show notes as well if a monthly contribution is a bit much for you. So besides the Patreon, there's the tip jar, the merchandise store, and other options as well. Exchange rates mean that even a few dollars go a very long way, so any contribution is much appreciated. But other than financially, there is another huge way that you can help Sleepy Time Tales, and that is simply to spread the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I can see and I can thank you. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. I heard from one person recently, I mentioned it last week, that they heard about the show from their mental health worker. And I know there are quite a few other regular listeners who very frequently spread the word and are very important to the success of Sleepy Time Tales and to the good night sleep of people in their lives. So it's very much appreciated. I'm going to keep this short tonight, so I'm just going to go last but not least, of course, is the music, which is very important. It's a very important part of the sonic identity of the show. And the song is, as usual, Un Désert by Kumiku. Their musical is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked the website in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff that they've released under various names that I recommend checking out. Thanks for taking the time, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a strange idea after all, isn't it? It's a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But in the 21st century and this year of 2020, lack of sleep is a health crisis. And this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, lying with your mind spinning and your emotions in turmoil with anxieties of life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find that you just can't quite get back to sleep at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm here to help you into a restful night. I've struggled to sleep myself for many years, and I gave my parents sleepless nights, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, sleep was always a struggle for me. I eventually discovered that droning male voices have a tendency to act almost like a tranquilizer for me. I used to lie in bed at night to listen to podcasts because I couldn't sleep, and I'd find myself waking up having slept through everything that I was trying to listen to. I discovered that there are podcasts out there specifically for the purpose of helping people to sleep, and I found stuff that worked very well for me. But often when I recommended it to others, it didn't work so much for them for various reasons. often they didn't like the sort of format of the story or the narrator's voice, and I found there were a lot of different varieties. And I also thought to myself, I've got a boring, droning voice, so maybe I can do my part to help others that the existing shows can't reach. And so I started up Sleepy Time Tales. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It's one of those things not everybody likes, and unfortunately, it's quite important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, for new listeners, I need to explain what it's for and sort of make a case for why I think it's worth listening to. And for people who've been around for a while, it's part of their process. Now, you don't actually end insomnia. Insomnia is a habit of sorts. So the best way to deal with it is to replace it with a new habit. So this long intro is all part of a process. It's a chance for people to develop a new habit and new sort of rituals for preparing for sleep. Now, if you're new to the show and you're not sure how to engage with it, there are a couple of possible ways. For me, when I listen to a sleep podcast, I need something to focus on. I need a story or an event that can keep my mind on something specific to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties. I need to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for me. For some people, it may be something a little bit different, a little bit more primal even. May need something more like white noise instead of the sound of the ocean or the sound of rain or wind in the leaves. Maybe just some boring, droning dude is more your style. Tonight's story is in the Onyx Lobby. It is a story of a young man who's fairly well privileged in New York society, and he's the heir designate to a bakery empire from his English uncle, and he has a forbidden love for someone that his aunt who looks after him is feuding with and has been for 20 years. So it's a bit of a charming little story with an interesting perspective. Worth your while, but nothing too exciting. But the story, whether it's doomed love and at-risk inheritance or whatever the subject of the matter is, the story doesn't really matter. Or it shouldn't matter too much. I do put some care into making sure something is somewhat interesting. But ultimately, the point is, if things go well, you will be asleep by the end of the episode. But you can't force it. You need to keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow sleep to come for you. And obviously, I'm hoping you're asleep by the time you get to the end of the story, but it's important you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night with us, the odds are actually pretty good it's not going to work. I recommend you give it preferably around 3 nights to see if this show works for you, if this idea of using a sleep podcast works for you. It's also possible that maybe I'm not the person for you to help. There's others out there and plenty of options. So if it doesn't work for you, there really are other people whose hands you will be very safe in. It's also possible that one episode isn't long enough. I know of at least one listener who sometimes lies awake and listens to 2 or 3 episodes. It's they've got a very healthy attitude to it, I think, because they don't consider that a failure, because ultimately, whether you're asleep or just relaxing, listening to the stories, you still are getting a benefit from it. And if that is beneficial to you, then that's great. What I do with my sleep podcasts is I start with the latest episode and I queue up a whole bunch. I've got usually like a whole night's worth to listen to. And often I wake up at 3 a.m. and I struggle to get back to sleep, and then I just pop my earbuds back in because the show is still playing, and go right back to sleep again. Sometimes even I wake up just before my alarm, 30 minutes or 60 minutes before the alarm, and I do the same thing. Pop my earbuds in, and there I go, straight back to sleep again. It may seem somewhat pointless to do that. What good is 30 minutes or 60 minutes of sleep? And I got to tell you now, it is a lot of good. There's just something about that allowing yourself to go to sleep right before the alarm that is satisfying on the deepest level. But however you listen to the show, whether it's the middle of the night or early in the morning or late at night, or you listening to a few episodes in a row, it's very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you. So as I said, give it a chance. Give it a couple of nights just to see how it works. And that's the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you to relax, to improve your life, to do my small part to help you deal with tomorrow and the day after. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness, and kindness is one of those phrases that often gets misused, but the truth is I do want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you, and most importantly, I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears, trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and we'll try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and progress that shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. In the Onyx Lobby by Carolyn Wells. Chapter 1. Such a Feud. Well, by the great catamaran, I think it's the most fruitful business I ever heard of. A regulation, clinkerbolt, angle iron, sunk-hinge family feud, carried on by two women. Women conducting a feud. They might as well conduct a bakery. I dare say they could do even that. Women have been known to bake with a fair degree of success. Of course, but baking and conducting a bakery are not identical propositions. Women are all right in their place, which, by the way, is not necessarily in the home, but a family feud of all things calls for masculine management and skill. Sir Herbert Binney stood by the massive mantelpiece in the ornate living room of the Prawl apartment. The Campanile Apartments house came into being with the century, and though its type was now superseded by the plain stucco of newer buildings, yet it hauntily flaunted its elaborate facade and its deeply embrasured windows, with the pride of an older day. Its onyx lobby, lined with massive pillars, had once been the talk of the neighborhood. and the black and white tessellated floor of the wide entrance hall was as black and white as ever. The location between the circle and the square, which is to say between Columbus Circle and Times Square in the city of New York, had ceased to be regarded as the pick of the householders, though still called the heart of the city. People who lived there were continually explaining the reason for their stay or moving across town. But lots of worthwhile people yet tarried, and among them were none more so than certain dwellers in the Campanile. Miss Letitia Proul, lessee of the mantelpiece already referred to, was a spinster who, on dress parade, possessed dignity and poise quite commensurate with the quality of her home. But in the shelter of her own fireside, she allowed herself latitude of speech and even loss of temper when she felt the occasion justified it. And any reference to or participation in the famous feud was such justification. Her opponent in the deadly strife was one Mrs. Everett, also an occupant of the Campanile and equally earnest in prolonging the life and energy of the quarrel. Sir Herbert Binney, an Englishman, knighted since the war, had come to America in the interests of his own business, no less an enterprise than the establishment of an American branch of the great and well-known Binney's Buns. Celebrated in England, he hoped and expected to make the admirable buns equally popular over here, and trusted to his engaging personality as well as his mercantile acumen to accomplish this purpose. Not exactly related to Miss Proul, Sir Herbert was connected by the marriage of a relative. That is, his stepbrother's son, one Richard Bates, was also the son of Miss Proul's sister. This younger gentleman, who, by the way, lived with his Aunt Letitia, was another reason for Sir Herbert's presence in New York. He had thought that if this nephew showed the right sort of efficiency, he could set to manage the American branch, or at least have a hand in the management. And so Binney of Binney's Buns had established himself in one of the smaller suites of the Campanile, had had his living room repapered to his taste, had made arrangements for his proper service, and was comfortably domiciled. The fly in his ointment was that young Bates didn't take at all kindly to the bun proposition, for the chap wasn't of an inventive turn and had already secured patents for some minor accessories and improvements connected with aeroplanes. Without parents or fortune of his own, Richard Bates was dependent so far on the generosity of his Aunt Proul, which, though judicious, was sufficient for his bodily welfare. But Bates was ambitious and desired large sums with which to carry on his inventions, certain that they, in return, would pay a thousandfold. As the only legal heir of both aunt and uncle, and with utmost faith in his own powers of success, Richard requested, almost indeed demanded, advanced on his inheritance, sufficient at least to put over his present great piece of work, which was expected to prove of decided value in aeronautic plans. But such advances were positively refused, by Miss Proul because Richard declined to accede to an accompanying condition, and by Uncle Binney because he wanted his nephew for his buns. The recipe for the famous buns was of an age and tradition that made it a historical document in England, and as yet unattained in this country, it was sought for by bakers and bunners of repute. But it was not for sale. Sir Herbert Binney would establish Binney's Buns in America, and all good Americans would eat thereof, but sell the recipe to some rival bake shop he would not. This state of things had made necessary much parley and many important meetings of baking powers. Among these were the Great Crippen's Cake Company, the Vale Bread Concern, the popular Popovers, and others of sufficient importance to get a hearing. Genial and good-natured, Sir Herbert met them all, discussed their offers, and reserved decision. He did not say, even to himself, that he was waiting on the will of one young man, but practically that was the truth. If Bates would give up his fool inventing and take hold of the buns in earnest, Sir Herbert would put him through with bells on, would make him heir of the buns and all the great English properties that the buns possessed, and would do all in his power to make the life of young Bates a bed of choicest roses. But Richard Bates had all the obstinacy and stubbornness of the born inventor. He knew he couldn't devote to bun business a brain teeming with new notions for the furtherance of scientific attainment, and he was too honest and honourable to accept the bun proposition and then turn to aeronautics on the side. Nor was a side issue of sufficient importance to satisfy his hunger for his own chosen work. He knew he could put up the goods that he had in mind if he could only get the presently needed money for his experiments and models. If he could but make either uncle or aunt agree to his views, he could later select his own roses for his bed of life. But Sir Herbert was as obstinate as his nephew, and Miss Letitia Prawl more so than either of them. Her unflinching and persistent adherence to her decisions was clearly shown in the matter of the long-contained feud. Not every woman could meet an opponent frequently and casually for 20 years or so, and pursue an even tenor of enmity. In the same social circles, Miss Prawl and Mrs. Everett attended the same teas, luncheons, and bridge parties, yet never deviated one jot or one tittle from their original inimical attitude. Never, or at least very rarely, were there sharp words in the presence of others, but there were scathing silences, slighting inattentions, and even venomous looks that could not pass unseen. In fact, they carried on their feud after what would doubtless be conceded by connoisseurs the most approved methods. And indeed, after 20 years' experience, it would be strange if the two ladies had not attained proficiency in the pursuit of quarrelling as a fine art. Not always had they lived under the same roof. The feud had begun when they were denizens of a small country town, and fostered in that nourishing atmosphere, had attained its proportions gradually but steadily. When circumstances took them to the city to live, and as if afraid the unsociability of town life might interfere with their hobby, the feudists acquired homes in two of the most desirable apartments of the Campanile. Miss Prawl, tall, spare, and with the unmistakable earmarks of spinsterhood, directed her menage with efficiency and capability of a general. She was nicknamed among her friends the Grenadier, and her strong character and aggressive manner made the description an apt one. Her one weakness was her adored nephew. As an orphaned infant left to Miss Letitia, a bequest from the dying mother, he had been immediately adopted into the child-hungry heart of the old maid, and had held and strengthened his position throughout the years, till at 25 he was the apple of one of her eyes, even as her precious feud was the apple of the other. But hers was no doting, misguided affection. Miss Prawl had brought up her nephew, as she did everything else, with the wisdom and sound judgment. To her training, the young Richard owed many of his most admirable traits, and much of his force of character. No man could have more successfully instilled into a boy's heart the fundamental requisites for true manliness, and only on rare occasions has his aunt's doting heart triumphed over a wise head in the matter of reproof or punishment. But now this upstart uncle, as Miss Prawl considered him, had come over here from England with all sorts of plans to take her boy from his chosen and desirable life work, and set him to making buns. Buns. Benny's buns for her gifted inventive genius. This impending disaster, together with a new and regrettable development affecting the feud, had thrown Miss Prawl into a state of nervous agitation, quite foreign to her usual condition of calm superiority. Masculine management and skill, she repeated with fine scorn, because not every woman is fitted by nature and circumstances to conduct affairs of importance. It does not follow that there are not some feminine spirits, with all the force and power of the other sex. By gad, madam, that is true. And Sir Herbert watched the Grenadier as she sat upright in her armchair, her fine head erect and her straight shoulders well back. I apologize for my seeming slight to your quarrelsome abilities, and I concede your will and strength to fight your own battles. In fact, my sympathies are for your antagonist. Huh. And Miss Prawl looked at him sharply, for he had been known to express satirical sentiments under guise of suavity. Don't waste your solicitude on her. She too is able to look out for herself. It would seem so, since she has taken part for 20 years in what is still a drawn battle. Let's up oldsters, laughed young Bates, coming breezily into the room. You know the main facts of the historic feud, Uncle Herbert, and take it from me, no amount of argument or advice on your part will help or in any way affect it. Aunt Letty will eat up your talk and then floor you with... Floor me? I think not. Benny of Benny's buns is not of the floorable variety. You say that because you haven't actually met Aunt Let in the arena. Benny's buns would cut no better figure than, say, Crippen's cakes. Crippen's cakes? Do you know Crippen? Does she? And Richard Bates grinned. Why, the cake Crippen is one of Aunt Letitia's old beaux. Might have been my uncle if... Hush, Richard, said the aunt. If he hadn't also shined up to Mrs. Everett in the rival faction, Richard went on with open relish of his aunt's discomfiture. Hush, Richard, she said again, and this time some veiled hint apparently was efficacious, for he changed the subject. I say, Uncle Herb, what about the Follies tonight? I've got a couple of seats, and I know your tastes. Front row? No, couldn't corral those, but good ones in the fourth. Nay, Pauline. I don't see well enough to sit so far back. Use those yourself, Richard. Take your aunt there. But I'll find a seat in the front row, and some front row if I have to buy the bloomin' theatre to get it. Good for you, Sir Herbert, exclaimed Miss Prowl, who admired determination wherever she met it. I'll go with you. I like the front row too. Sorry, madam, but I'm not taking guests. He winked at Richard. Naturally not, Miss Letitia sniffed. I know why you want to go alone. I know why you want the front row. You're going to attract a chorus girl and invite her to supper with you. Marvellous, Holmes, marvellous, Sir Herbert exclaimed with mock amazement. I am surprised at your clairvoyance, ma'am, but deeply pained that you should know of and be so familiar with such goings-on. Do you learn of that sort of thing from your nephew? Really, Richard, I'm amazed at you. Nonsense, Uncle Ben. I passed through that stage long ago. I used to girl around in my callow days, but I got fed up with it, and now life holds more worthwhile temptations. It's an old story to Auntie, too. Why, she used to chaperone my giddiest parties, bless her. Sir Herbert's sharp eyes looked from one of his companions to the other. You're a pair, he opined, both tarred with the same brush. And the brush? Asked Miss Prowl, belligerently. Modern sophistication and the present-day fad of belittling everything that is interesting or pleasurable. That mental phase is the inevitable result of worldly experience, said the lady with a cynical smile. How is it that you preserve such youthful interest? Well, and the Englishman looked a little quizzical, you see the girls are still young. Very young, assented Bates gravely. There's a new bunch of squabs at the Gay Night Review that'll do you up. Better buy that place out, Hunky. Perhaps. But now, young Richard, let's discuss some more eminent, if not more important, questions. Say, buns, for instance. Nothing doing. I've said my last word on the bun subject, and if you persist in recurring to it, you'll only get that last word over again. Repeated, reiterated, recapitulated, and if necessary, reinforced. With some good strong epithets, I suppose, remarked his uncle calmly. I don't blame you, Rick, for being bored by my persistency, but you see, I haven't yet given up all hopes of making you see reason. Why do? When you do what? Time enough to answer that question when it's time to ask it. Instead, let me recount the advantages I can offer you. Oh Lord, pardon my interrupting, but that recounting is an old story, you know. Those advantages are as familiar to my wearied mind as my own name, or at least yours and your precious buns. Stop, sir. Don't you speak slightingly of Bunny's buns? They were eaten before you were born and will be eaten after you are dead and forgotten. Not forgotten if I put my invention over. You'll never do it. Your success is problematical. The buns are no assured fact. They were eaten before the war, they will be eaten again now that the war is over. They are eaten in England, they will be eaten in America. If not with the help of your interest and energy, then with that of someone else. Think well, my boy, before you throw away fame and fortune. To acquire fame and fortune. To strive for it and fail, for that is what you will do. You're riding for a fall and you're going to get it. Not if I can prevent it, Miss Prawl interposed in her low yet incisive tones. I am ready to back Ricky's prospects to the utmost, if only... If only what? What is this condition you impose on the lad, and why keep it so secret? Tell me, nephew. I'll let you in on the buns in spite of any block on your scutcheon. What is it that troubles your aunt? What always troubles her? What has spoilt and embittered her whole life, hardened her heart, corroded her soul? What but her old, ridiculous, absurd, contemptible, damnable feud? There, my boy. Remember your aunt is a lady, and such expressions are not permissible before her. Pish, tush, snorted Miss Prawl, who would not have herself objected to the descriptive verb, since it gave the very impression she wanted to convey. If I did not permit such expressions, Richard would not use them. Rest assured of that. Bates smiled and lighted a fresh cigarette. These taunts between his elders greatly amused him. They seemed so futile and inane, yet of such desperate interest to the participants. Then that's all right, Sir Herbert conceded. Now, Richard, for the last time, I offer you the chance to fall in with my wishes, to consent to my fondest desire and attach yourself to my really stupendous enterprise. I want with my whole soul to keep Bunny's buns in the family. I want a worthy partner and successor and one of my own bloodkin. But I can't force you into this agreement. I can only urge you, with all the powers of my persuasion, to see it rightly and to realize that your refusal will harm you more than anyone else. I'll take a chance on that, Uncle Ben. Bates gave him a cheery smile that irritated by its carelessness. You'll lose, sir. You'll see the day that you'll wish you had taken up with my offers. You'll regret when it's too late. Why, what's your alternative plan? Aha. Interested, are you? Well, young sir, my alternative plan is to find somebody with more common sense and good judgment than your rattle-pated, pig-headed self. That's my alternative plan. Got anybody in view? And if I have? Go to it. Go to it. Take my blessing and stand not on that order of your going to it. But Skittle, you can't go too fast to suit me. You're an impudent and disrespectful young rascal. Your bringing up is sadly at fault if it allows you to speak thus to your elders. Oh, come off, Uncle Benny. You may be older than I in actual years, but you've got to hand it to me on the score of temperamental senescence. Why, you're a very kid in your enthusiasm for the halls of dazzling light and all that in them is. So, and by the way, old top, I mean no real disrespect, but I consider it a compliment to your youth and beauty to recognize it in a feeling of camaraderie and good fellowship. Are we on? Yes, that's all right, son. But can't your good fellowship extend itself to the buns? Nixie, never. Cut out all bun talk and I'm your friend and partner. Bun and you bun alone. A long, steady gaze between the eyes of the young man and the old seemed to convince each of the immutability of this decision, and with a deep sigh the bun promoter changed the subject. This Gay Heart Review now, Richard, he began. Don't consider the question settled, Sir Herbert, said Miss Letitia Prawl, with a note of anxiety in her voice, quite unusual to it. Give me a chance to talk to Ricky alone, and I feel almost certain I can influence his views. A little late in the day, ma'am, Benny returned shortly. I have an alternative plan, but if I wait much longer to make use of it, the opportunity may be lost. Unless Richard changes his mind today, he needn't change it at all, as far as I'm concerned. Going to organize a bakery of ex-chorus girls? Asked Bates flippantly. Going to persuade them to throw in their fortunes with you? A merry, even affectionate smile robbed the speech of all unpleasant effect, and Sir Herbert smiled back. Not at all, he returned. I'd be ill-fitted to attend to a bakery business with a horde of enchanting damsels cavorting around the shop. No, chorus girls are all right in their place, which is not in the home, nor yet in the business office. That's true, and I take my hat off to you, Uncle. As a real live businessman with his undivided attention on his work and business hours, and outside of those, his doings are nobody's business. With your leanings towards the fair sex, it's a wonder you never married, observed Miss Prawl inquisitively. My leanings toward them in no way implies their leanings towards me, returned the bachelor, his eyes twinkling. And moreover, a regard for one of the fairer sex that would imply a thought of marriage with her would be another matter entirely from a liking for the little stars of the chorus. To me, they are not even individuals, for they are merely necessary parts of an entertaining picture. I care no more for them personally than for the orchestra that makes music for the dancing feet, or for the stage manager who produces the setting for their engaging gracefulness. That's so, Uncle, Bates agreed. You're a stage Johnny all right, but you're no Lothario. Thank you, son. Such discriminating praise from Sir Hubert Stanley makes me even more than ever regret not having his association in my business affairs. Don't be too sure that you won't have him, Miss Prawl temporized. When does his time for decision expire? Tonight, said Sir Herbert. Briefly, and at that, with a gesture of bored impatience, Bates got up and went out. Chapter 2. A Tricky Game. The Prawl apartment was on the 8th floor, but Richard Bates passed by the elevator and went down the stairs. Only one flight, however, and on the 7th floor, he walked along the hall, whistling in a subdued key. The air was an old song, a one-time favorite. Won't you come out and play with me? And the faint notes grew stronger as he passed a certain door. Then he went on, but soon turned, retraced his steps, and went up again the one flight of stairs. Pausing at the elevator, he pushed the down button and was soon in the car, and smiling on the demure young woman in uniform who rang it. This car of yours, Daisy, he remarked, is like the Church of St. Peter at Rome. It has an atmosphere of its own. But if the church had this atmosphere, there'd be mighty few worshippers. How can you stand it? Doesn't it make you ill? Ill? And the girl rolled weary eyes at him. I'm dead. You can bring the flowers when you're ready, Gridley. Poor child. And Bates looked compassionately at the white face that even a vanity case failed to keep in blooming condition. So moisty warm was the stuffy elevator. It's wicked to shut you up in such a cage. Oh, I'm all right, she responded hurriedly, as a bell sounded a sharp, impatient ring. I'm not complaining. But people are so trying on a day like this. That's Mr. Binney's ring. How do you know? Do you know everybody's touch? Not everybody's, but lots of them. Mr. Binney, he hates elevator girls. Oh, come now. My uncle is a great admirer of all women. Not if they work. He talks a good deal, you know. Talks all the time. And he's everlastingly knocking girls who do the work he thinks men ought to do. But it's none of his business in this house. Mr. Binney is particularly and especially interested in what's none of his business. The girl spoke so bitterly that Bates looked at her in surprise. But he was at the ground floor, and as he left the elevator, he forgot all else in anticipation of a certain coming delight. He strolled the length of the great Onyx Lobby, Its sides a succession of broad mirrors between enormous onyx columns with massive gilded capitals. Tall palms were at intervals, alternating with crimson velvet sofas, and on one of these, near the vestibule, Bates sat down to wait for the delight. And in the course of time she came, tripping along the black and white diamonds of the marble floor, her high heels tapping quickly, her lithe gracefulness hurrying to keep the tryst. Dorcas Everett was of the type oftenest seen among the well-to-do young girls of New York, but she was one of the best examples of that type. Wise, sparkling eyes, soft rounded chin held alertly up, dark curly hair arranged in a pleasant modification of the latest fashion. Her attire was of the most careful tailor-made variety, and a little feathered toque was put on at just the right angle and was most engagingly becoming. She said no word, but gave a happy smile as Bates rose and eagerly joined her, and together they passed out through the imposing portal. "It's awful," she murmured, as they walked across to Fifth Avenue. "I said I wouldn't do it again, and then, when I heard your whistle, I just couldn't help it. But don't do it any more, will you? You promised you wouldn't." "Oh, I didn't promise, dear. I said I'd try not to. And I did try, but it seems I failed." "Bad boy. Very ricky-ticky-tavi. But what are we going to do?" "First of all, where are we going? Tea room? Some place where I can talk to you?" "No, it's too stuffy today to be indoors. Let's walk up to the park and go in." "All right. Now, Dory, we just face this thing. We can't go on meeting secretly. Neither of us likes it." "I should say not. I hate it 1,000 times worse than you do. But, Rick, Mother is more obstinate than ever. She says if I ever see you again or speak to you, she'll pack up and move out of New York. Think of that." "I can't think of it. It's unthinkable. Now, Dorcas, darling, there's only one thing to do. You must marry me." "Hush that nonsense. Don't propose." "Naturally not. I'm doing the proposing." "Don't think because you make me laugh you're going to bamboozle me into consent. I decline, refuse, and renounce you if you're going to take that tack. I shall never marry you without the consent of my mother and your aunt, and you know that." "I do know it, Dork, and that's what breaks me all up. Confound that old feud. But I say Uncle Benny is on our side. I sounded him, and he approves of my marrying at once. Doesn't care who the girl is, and will make me his heir and all that. If you give up on inventing and going into his bunny business." "Yes, that's his game. Shall I do it?" "No, 1,000 times no. I don't want to marry a bakery. And anyway, it wouldn't help the feud." "No, nothing will help that. It would seem that we could move the hearts of those two women, but my mother is hard as adamant, and my aunt is hard as nails, and after all these years, they're not going to be moved by a pair of broken young hearts." "No. Mother says that because I'm so young, my heart will heal up in plenty of time to break over somebody else." "Pleasant thought." "Oh, my mother doesn't try to be pleasant about it. She makes my life a burden by harping on my undutifulness and all that. And when she isn't ballyragging me, Kate is." "Kate? A servant?" "But Kate doesn't look upon herself as a servant exactly. She's lady's maid now, to Mother and me. But she was my nurse, and she thinks she sort of owns me. Anyway, she acts so." "And she stands for the feud?" "Rather. She believes in the feud and all its works." "And she's a spy too. If she hadn't believed my yarn that I was headed for Janet's today, she'd be downstairs trailing me." "Clever Dork to outwit her?" "That's nothing. I'm clever enough to hoodwink her and Mother too, but I don't want to. I hate it, Rick. I hate anything underhanded or deceitful. Only my love for you made me come out here today." The big, dark eyes looked wistfully into Bates's blue ones. The troubled look on Dorcas's dear little face stirred the depths of his soul, and his heart struggled between his appreciation of her high-mindedness and his yearning love. "I want you, Dory," he said simply. "I want you terribly, desperately, and I must admit it. I would be willing to take you on any terms. I'd run away with you in a minute if you'd go. To be sure, I honor your truthfulness and all that. But oh, little girl, can't you put me ahead of your mother?" "I don't know." "You're hesitating. You've thought about it. Oh, Dork, will you?" There, don't go so fast. No, I won't. But tell me this. Would your uncle stand for it and let you go on with your own work? Oh no, it's buns or nothing with him and me. But I'm his heir. If he should drop off suddenly, I'd have his whole fortune. Dead men's shoes? Oh, Ricky, for shame. Not at all. If he can make a will, I can talk about it. And he told me he has made a will in my favor. But he's going to change it if I don't adopt his buns. What nonsense, even to think about it. Let him change it then, for you'll never be a bun man. I wonder if it would help matters if you met Uncle Bunny. Let's try it. Though I'm sure I should call him Uncle Bunny. Does he like girls? Adores them. That is, some sorts. He likes nice girls properly. He likes naughty girls, perhaps improperly. But the girls in the house, the elevator girls and the telephone girls, he just hates. Hates? They irritate him somehow. He thinks all such positions should be filled by men or boys. He says the war is over and he wants all the girls taken off those jobs. How unjust and unreasonable. Uncle Herbert has both of those admirable qualities, but he'd adore you, unless he found out you'd disapprove of the buns, and then he'd turn and rend you. I don't disapprove of them, except for you. That's what I mean. For me. Then I guess I'd better not meet friend Bunny. Oh, Dorcas, I don't know what to do. There's no light from any direction. There's no hope from your mother, my aunt, or Sir Herbert. If you won't cut and run with me, and if you're in earnest about not meeting me secretly anymore, what can we do? Nothing, Rick. Nothing at all. Dorcas spoke very seriously, even sadly, and Bates realized how much in earnest she was. They were in the park now, and by tacit consent, they sat down on a bench near the mall. Their eyes met dumbly. The Bates was only 25 and Dorcas 22. They were both older than their years, and were of fine temper and innate strength of character. They had known one another as children in their little hometown, and later, as the feud developed and gained strength, the young people had been sent away to schools. Later, the war took Richard from home, and only very recently had propinquity brought about the interest that soon ripened to love. And a deeper, more lasting love than is often found between two young hearts. Both took it very seriously, and each thoroughly realized the tragedy of the attitude of their respective guardians. Good gracious, Richard. I shall go straight home and tell your aunt. This speech was from the stern-faced woman who paused in front of the pair on the bench. Good gracious, Eliza. Go straight ahead and do so. Bates' eyes shot fire and his face flushed with anger. Eliza Gurney was his aunt's companion, indeed her tame cat, her chattel, and partly from charity, partly because of need of her services, Miss Brawl kept Eliza with her constantly. Of a fawning parasitic nature, the companion made the best of her opportunities, and without being avowed spy, she kept watch on Richard's movements, as far as she conveniently could. And in this instance, suspecting his intent, she had followed the young couple at a discreet distance and now faced them with an accusing eye. Don't, pleaded Dorcas, as Miss Gurney turned to follow up Richard's suggestion. Oh dear, Miss Gurney, help us, won't you? We're in such a hopeless tangle. You were young once, and Dorry could scarcely have chosen a worse argument. for that a youth had slipped away from her was Miss Gurney's worst fear. "I am forbidden to speak to this girl, Richard," Miss Gurney said with pursed lips and heightened colour. She addressed herself carefully to Bates and ignored the presence of Dorcas. "You are too, as you well know, and though you have so far forgotten yourself as to disobey your aunt, I have no intention of committing a like sin." "Fudge, Eliza, don't go back on me like that. You used to be my friend. Have you forsaken me entirely?" "If you've forsaken your aunt, not unless. Leave this girl instantly and go home with me, and there'll be no question of forsaking." "Forsake Miss Everett? Not while this machine is to me. Go home yourself, Eliza. Be a tattletale if you want to, but get out of here." Bates became furious because of a malevolent gleam in Miss Gurney's eyes as she looked at Dorcas. "I'll go, Richard, and I shall not only tell your aunt what I have seen, but I shall feel it my duty to acquaint Mrs. Everett with the facts." "Don't you dare," cried Dorcas, springing up and facing the unpleasant-faced one with uncontrollable indignation. "What I do, I tell my mother myself. I didn't have the news carried to her by her enemy's spy." "Hoity-toity, miss, you're a chip off the old block, I see. And you're a trustworthy soul to be talking to me when you're forbidden to do so." The triumph in Dorcas's tone was quite as galling to Eliza Gurney as her own chagrin at having broken her word. But once in the moil, she saw no reason for backing out and proceeded to pick an open quarrel. "I can explain my speech with you to Miss Prawle's satisfaction," she went on acidly. "And I'll inform you, Miss Everett, that you've spoiled Mr. Bates's life by this clandestine affair of yours. I happen to know that his uncle, Sir Herbert Binney, was just about to make him his heir, but he will change his mind when he hears of this escapade." "Oh, clear out, Eliza," stormed Bates. "You've given us enough of that drivel. Now hook it. Hear me?" Miss Gurney stared at him. "Your companionship with this young woman has corrupted your good manners," she began, quite undeterred by his wrath. Whereupon Bates took her firmly by the shoulder, spun her around, and said, "Go," in such a tone that she fairly scurried away. "I vanquished her," he said, a little ruefully. "But I'm afraid it's a frying pan and fire arrangement. She'll tell Aunt Letitia, and either Aunt or Eliza herself will go at once to your mother with the tale." "Well, I'd really rather they be told. I had to tell Mother, for truly, Rick, I can't live in an atmosphere of deceit. I may be a crank or a craven, but as much as I love you, I can't stand keeping a secret." "I know it, dear, and I don't like it a bit better than you do. Only to tell is to be separated, at once and maybe forever." "No," cried Dorcas, looking at his serious face. "Not forever." "Yes, even you don't realize the lengths to which these two women will go. I hate to speak so of your mother. I hate to speak so of my aunt. But I know they'll move out of town, one or both, and they'll go to the ends of the earth to keep us apart." "But they've always lived near each other, for years, in the same building." "Yes, that was so they could quarrel and annoy and tantalize each other. But now the necessity of separating us two will be their paramount motive, and you'll see, they'll do it. Then let's get married and go off by ourselves. Darling, if we only could. And I'll go into the buns in a minute if you say so. Much as I hate to give up my own work, I'd not hesitate, Eve, except for your sake." "No, I don't want to marry a bakery man, and I've too much ambition for you to let you throw your talent away. Yet we couldn't live on nothing a year, and until your inventions are further along, you can't realize anything on them. Bless me, what a little businesswoman it is. Well, we've both got common sense enough not to make fools of ourselves. But oh, Dork, I do want you so, and if it were not for that foolish, ridiculous feud, we could be so happy." "It isn't exactly the feud. I mean, of course it is that, but it's the back of that. It's the determined, never-give-up natures of the two women. I don't know which is more obstinate, Mother or Miss Prawl, but I know, oh, Ricky, I know neither of them will ever surrender." Of course they won't. I know that too. So must we give up? What choice have we? What alternative? None. Bates's face was blankly hopeless. But Dork, dear, I can't live without you. Can't you look ahead to something? I can't see anything to look ahead to. We might say we'll wait for each other. I'm willing, and something tells me that you are. But that's an unsatisfactory arrangement. Oh, it's all of that. Oh, hang it all, Dork. I'll just go into some respectable business and earn a living. I'll give up my plans, and if you do that, you may as well go in for buns. Buns? I thought you scorned the idea. Principally because I want you to be an inventor. But if you give up your life work, oh, Rick, what could you do? Nothing much at first. I'd have to take a clerkship or something and work up. I'm willing to share poverty with you, in theory, but you don't realize what the reality would mean to us. Not only because we're both accustomed to having everything we want, but more especially because in these days it's too dangerous. Suppose we lived on the tiniest possible income and then you fell ill, or I did, or you lost your position, or anything that interrupted our livelihood. Then we'd have to go back to mother or to your aunt and, dost like the picture? I does not. It's out of the question. I love you too much and too truly to take such desperate chances. I think, after all, Dork, the buns are our one best bet. Benny's buns, get a bun. Oh, Ricky, couldn't hold up my head. I know it, you little inborn aristocrat. And I feel the same way about it. Well, we've got to get home and face the music, I suppose. Yes, and we've got to go now. I'll get more and worse scolding for every minute I stay here. Also, if Eliza tells your mother, she'll be sending Kate for you. Yes, or coming herself. Come along, let's start. The walk home was saddened by the thought that it was the last. Able to face the situation, both knew there was no hope that they should be allowed to continue their acquaintance, and knew that now it was discovered they should very soon be as widely separated as the efforts of their elders could arrange. Their pace slowed as they neared the Campanile. Dear old place, said Dorcas, as the house came into their ken. Dear old nothing, returned Bates. I think it's an arsehole, don't you? That bunch of Mexican onyx ought to be taken away to make king sarcophagi. What a thought. Yes, it's hideous, but I didn't mean its appearance. It's dear to me because we've lived here together, and I've a premonition that before long, widely separated roofs will cover our heads. I'll conquer somehow, Bates declared. I haven't made many protestations, but I tell you, Dork, that I'm coming out on top of this heap. What are you going to do? Something desperate? Maybe so. Maybe only something queer. But get you I shall, and I will. You're intended for my mate, but omniscient fate, and I'm going to find a way to help set fate along. She seems to be sidetracked for the moment. I wish I had more faith in your fate helping. Oh, don't look like that. I've faith enough in you, but helping fate is a tricky game. All right, I'm willing to play a tricky game then. You are, son, against whom? And the pair entering the wide doorway met Sir Herbert Binney coming out. Oh, hello, Uncle, cried Bates, grasping the situation with both hands. Let me present you to Miss Everett. Dorcas, this is my uncle. How do you do, Uncle Bunny, said Dorcas, quite unwittingly that, in her surprised embarrassment, she had used the very word she had feared she would utter. And an unfortunate mistake it proved. The smiling face of the Englishman grew red and wrathful, assuming as he did, and not without cause, that the young woman intended to guy him. Daughter of your own mother, hey? He said to her, ready with a sharp tongue for any occasion. Apology was useless, and that all that quick-witted Dorcas could think of was to carry it off as jest. No, sir, she said, with an adorable glance of coquetry at the angry face, but I have an unbreakable habit of using nicknames. And as I've heard of you from Ricky, and I almost feel as if I know you, I just naturally called you Bunny for a pet name. Oh ho, you did? Well, I can't believe that. I think you're making fun of my trade, and that's the one thing I won't stand. Perhaps when your precious Ricky depends on those same buns for his daily food, you won't feel so scornful of them. I never dreamed you were ashamed of them, sir. And Dorcas gave up the idea of peacemaking and became irritating. Nor am I, he blazed. You are an impertinent chit, and I bid you good day. Now you have done it, said Bates. And that's it for tonight. If you made it this far and are interested in carrying on with the story, you can find a link to the book on Project Gutenberg in the show notes. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you will find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.